So, as tends to happen with me, I have sat down and written a 7-page review for this game, and as it turned out, it was terrible, as most of them are, and I just didn't feel happy with the way it turned out, so we're going to try and shoot this shit off the cuff. So, Runaway, a road adventure, made by Pendulo Studios, released in 2001. This is pretty much the game that saved the studio, launching the Runaway franchise and basically keeping them in operation till the present day, where they've recently produced the Black Sad adventure game, which came out in 2019, which I'm definitely going to play at some point. But yeah, I'm assuming you probably want to hear me talk about the game I played, because this is the review for that game, so I should probably stop talking about that other fucking thing. But anyway, Runaway, a road adventure is a very horny, pulpy, point-and-click adventure game, and I do really mean those two terms because they do permeate everything the game ends up doing. I remember referring to the game previously as just a very Spanish game, and I don't want to make that sound like I'm just generalizing Spanish media, but it's kind of there. I don't necessarily know where to go with that sentence, but I'll just leave it there and let people make their own judgments. Essentially, Runaway Road Adventure is the story of Brian, God's perennial psychotic himbo, and when you become an adventure game protagonist, you basically do become some level of psychopath, on the run from the mob with Gina, a lounge singer, who are both getting tied up in a mystery involving an ancient Hopi crucifix, shenanigans, spirit mediums, drag queens, and so much other shit I can't even begin to try and summarise it without going into major spoilers. But essentially, it is your classic road trip fare of wacky situations, colourful characters, and naturally the kind of requisite sexual tension that you have to put between a man and a woman when they're in a situation together, because of course you can't just have Brian be gay, or you can't just have them some kind of platonic thing. Fuck it, I don't want to get into the fucking spoilers already, but there's shit about this game that does piss me off. Essentially, the game is colourful, the visual style is pretty nice, even though the facial animations in some places are a bit dodgy. The soundtrack is fine, even if they do only have one actual music track to play, the whole Runaway theme, which they do remix and repurpose, which is kind of nice. I like the fact that they do kind of almost lampshade the fact they've only got one song to really use, and then they've all got and then it's nothing but just ambient background sound. The only real snag I would say, and the only real warning I would give, is that while this game does feel accessible in the first part, it still abides by a lot of the very tired, worn-out adventure game cliches that you'll find in older games like LucasArts and Sierra. You've got things like very arbitrary pixel hunting, you've got the really frustrating returning to the same item or same place to get a new feature or learn some new information, all of which is contextually laid out within the spectrum of a puzzle. So for example, if you are at the beginning of a puzzle, you can go to a location, search it, and find an item, and then, say, 7 or 8 steps further down the track, have to go back there to find a completely separate item for the problem you now have to face. This would all be fine if the game had any kind of journal system or way of prompting the player to understand, I probably need to do this now. As it stands, especially in the final chapters, the game really does just snarl up and become this tedious back and forth of going to a location, going to another location, figuring out, okay, I need this, where do I go and find the item that allows me to do this, going back through several other locations. Effectively, I finished the game by pretty exclusively referring to the guide, because I didn't want to take an additional 3 hours to figure out precisely what I needed to do and where I needed to go. That all being said, I still enjoyed my time with Runaway. I would actually say this has turned me on and revitalised my interest in the point-and-click adventure genre. I am really looking forward to trying out Pendulo's other works, like Black Sad, as I said, and then you've got Mystery of the Turtle, I think is the sequel to this one, and a few others besides, a lot of which are already in my Steam library. If you're a newcomer to this kind of stuff, it's fine. I would say it's not the most ludicrously complex. There aren't too many puzzles. It's definitely not going to be like Myst, where you stand there staring at a lever for 3 hours going, what the fuck is this? But it's still got some foibles and some issues. So I would say, if you're new to this, definitely play it with a guide in one hand. If you're a seasoned veteran, it's probably not going to be too much of a challenge. But anyway, that's the spoiler-free part of the review. I would personally recommend it. You can often pick up the Runaway bundle on Steam for not much money. It's often pretty cheap. But aside from that, I would say this is a decent game. This is definitely worth your time, and I'm glad it was able to revitalize Pendulo and get them back on the B list game circuit at the very least. But anyway, fuck off. If you don't want spoilers, to be honest, if you get spoiled about this game, it's not really going to make a massive difference. It's mostly racial caricatures and maybe some dubious representation of transvestites, and it's very Spanish. It's so early noughties European. It's like, what do I fucking do? Do they mean it? Do they not mean it? Is it somewhere in between? Oh fuck. Right. But anyone who didn't want to be spoiled, I'm assuming you've now gone. Alright, cool. So, Runaway pretty much kicks off in medias res, with Gina witnessing the death of her dad, and then running out into the street and getting just clobbered by Brian in a car, which would have just been the funniest instant kind of close to a story of, oh, she runs out of the alley and just, oh no, fuck, she's dead. Alright, fair enough, story over. Brian gets fucking arrested and can't go to Berkeley. But yeah, essentially, the whole game just rotates around Brian and Gina trying to figure out precisely what the key MacGuffin, the little Hopi crucifix, actually means, and precisely why this is causing a bunch of mafia hitmen to come after them, causing them to fucking road trip all over the country in order to figure out precisely what's going on. As this kind of progresses, the game does manage to hold itself together fairly competently. I was kind of worried it was going to start meandering and flailing around with all sorts of subplots and all sorts of other diversions, but to its credit, the way that the game is written, it is fairly concise, it's fairly fluid in the way it does progress from A to B, and you are always given a roughly accurate idea of what you're supposed to be doing. Very early on, pretty much in the first scene when you're in the hospital, Gina does point out that someone is coming to kill her. She hasn't got the means to defend herself, so Brian has to cobble together some way of making it not look like that's Gina in the bed and there's a second person for the hitman to come in and whack. You do this by interacting with a bunch of items. The first piece of arbitrary pixel hunting comes into play just there, which really did knock an extra 10 minutes onto my playtime right there and then, because it pulls the really shitty trick of putting an interactable item, within the perimeter of a second interactable item. And I've played games that have really fucked up in this regard. I believe there's a game called A New Beginning that came out in 2011. I actually playtested it back when I was doing writing work for Beefjack. And it had a very simple thing. You just held down the spacebar and it highlighted the interactable things in a scene. I know this was 10 years later, but I'm pretty certain this basic technology, just being able to highlight the perimeter of an interactable field on the screen, would not have been beyond the ability of a fucking developer. I feel like sometimes the point-and-click adventure games try and make interaction too difficult, rather than the puzzles themselves. I would rather just have a very complex puzzle and I have all the pieces to hand, than have a very unintuitive user interface that I then have to try and parse out to get even the most simple things done. Slight rant there, do excuse me. But essentially, the whole game kind of goes from step to step as you go through the museum, where you are introduced to probably one of the most organic and worst puzzle-solving elements of the entire game. And also possibly a little bit more to the best and worst writing the game has to offer. I'll very quickly talk about the writing here as well. The game's dialogue is acceptable, but at the same time it does not necessarily feel like it's trying to be naturalistic. Runaway is very much a game that is wearing that pulpy kind of idea, that kind of love of schlocky and slightly lewd humour on its sleeve, yet on occasion, and especially when you get to the museum, it does start to get borderline preamble to a porno kind of quality, and I was a little concerned I was about to just see pixelated tits just flying all over the screen, but thankfully, no, that was just some kind of subtle implication, because essentially you do have moments where you are talking to some characters, and they are shrill, nasally, obstinate, just caricatures of people, and then you actually run into other characters where you go, oh, are you trying to be a thoughtful and straight up portrayal of this person, or are you just doing that by accident, just by trying to write them as a regular character? It's very hard to play. Because essentially you do have, say in the earlier chapters, more straight up just regular people. I say regular people, that sounds a bit offensive to people who come in later, but essentially the less wacky characters, before you then go to the Arizona chapter, where you are stuck out in the middle of the desert in probably my favourite segment of the entire game, which is effectively just a long love letter to Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, where you have 3 drag queens called the Divas stranded in their tour bus in the desert, who seem to be the only people nearby from where Brian and Gina have been abducted and locked in a cabin. And the Divas are... it's an awkward thing, because I've been knocking around the idea of queer representation in gaming for quite a while now, and it's something I do want to talk about in greater length. And I'm not entirely certain how to feel about how Runaway actually portrays the drag queens in this game, because on the one hand, they are very physically exaggerated. There's a very slender, lanky, kind of imposingly chinned drag queen, Lola. And then you've got Gina, who... Oh, sorry, not Gina. Gina's not a drag queen. I mean, she could be. I would not have any problem with Gina being trans or anything like that, but I... Brain, thank you. When so many of the female characters are all ending their name with A or some variation of it, it's like, I don't know where the fuck to go with that, because you've got Mariola as well, and then... Oh, I cannot remember the final one. It's not too far off of Lola, though, I know that much. I'll probably put it on the video just like, boom, you fucking idiot. Anyway, they are physically exaggerated, and their dialogue is very much playing up the more pronounced caricature of femininity that drag performers tend to go for, where it is very exaggerated, it is very bold and open, but it is not trying to convey weakness. It is just trying to ramp everything up to 110% for the sake of just blowing you away with just this force of personality. And I can imagine people looking at this and going, this feels kind of fucked up. Why are you treating transvestites like this? Why are you making them seem like ludicrous stereotypes? But at the same time, the game actually presents them and actually utilizes them in a very empowered way. The actual segment where this all takes place actually resolves with the drag queens helping Brian in a very elaborate and action-packed escape sequence, which involves a belt-fed lipstick machine gun, a blown-up oil well with TNT, and a fucking helicopter escape, because one of the drag queens happens to also be ex-military and knows how to fly a helicopter. I feel like this game could have really fucked up the way it handled this and made Brian just the only guy who could do anything useful, but by actually having the Divas prove to be completely instrumental in how the plan plays out, I was really impressed and genuinely kind of liked the way it all handled. I feel like possibly this very much a case of personal taste, and I am maybe not the best arbiter to talk about, oh, this is good queer representation, this is bad queer representation, but I didn't feel like it came from a bad place, and frankly, if you look at it as a feature within the game, as a kind of event that happens, I don't see many other games doing anything close to this, so credit where it's due. I do also have to give the game credit for making me incredibly horny on main in this section, as John St. John has 2 roles in this game. Later, he comes up as Wapuchim, the Hopi chief who just seems to teleport in and out, really just doubling down on that magical Native American stereotype that seems to be used quite a lot in games and movies. But earlier comes up as, and I shit you not, he comes up in the credits as Stud, just a big beefy shirtless himbo who just shotguns beer cans. And yeah, I think at this point I should probably talk about how horny this game is as well. Because I don't know if it's just me, I don't know if it's just my malformed sexual preferences or not, but Runaway's got a lot of fairly attractive character models. The faces are often very much all over the place, but I don't know, Pendulo's definitely got someone on there who knows how to lovingly craft a set of just juicy buns, and I don't know where precisely I'm going with that sentence, but needless to say, it is a game where there's a definite bit of eye candy on display, but it's never too clear whether or not that's intentional, or if it's the same kind of caricature that they're doing with other characters, and it's just shameless fan service, whereas this is more the shameless, stupid portrayal of a person. So, yeah, it's very curious. In terms of the rest of the graphical kind of layout, the game is actually pretty good looking. It's got a very consistent cartoonish kind of style, which never kind of goes into totally abstract, although it still uses those very curved, very kind of non-Euclidean lines and sculpting of forms to give this slightly distorted perspective of things, but it never feels so abstract that you start to really struggle to find out what's going on screen. It's hyperrealism, magical realism, something along those lines, where everything is just that little bit extra than what it should have originally been, which works fine for the game overall. The final section from here on out is pretty much where the game does start to give me the biggest issues. Douglasville, which is the final main area where you're beginning to find... oh, fuck! I forgot it when I was writing the script, and I just forgot it now. So there is a very belabored, emotional moment just after the Arizona drag queens moment, where you get dropped off close to this Hopi village where you would find out more information about this crucifix. Only for Gina to just fucking spontaneously fall down a hole and die. Yeah. like I just sat there and was like, no, she's not fucking dead. You do not kill off a character you have spent that much time modelling to then just go, boop, okay, right, moving on with a completely different character now. You haven't got the balls to kill off the romantic interest like that. An Italian game, maybe, but not a Spanish game. Spanish games are too horny. Am I being really prejudiced against Spanish people? I really hope I'm not. I love you guys. Godspeed you, horny bastards. But yeah, the game then kicks off this kind of penultimate chapter with Gina pretty much not being a factor, and to be honest, the game has taken rather drastic steps to make sure that Gina is barely more than set dressing up until this point anyway, so it felt really contrived to get her out of the way this way. She could not have simply been doing something else in Douglasville, maybe like standing off to one side and giving us hints as to how to solve the puzzles, since Douglasville is also where the game gets really unnecessarily fucking elaborate with its puzzles, and I got really, really mad. But anyway, this whole section is basically performing about 20 different tasks to accomplish the one task that actually needs to be done, removing the boulder from the mine entrance so we can then go through it and actually find the Hopi village on the other end. To do this, we need to bribe Oscar, who is this huge, somewhat maybe mentally set back gentleman with menthol chewing tobacco. Trust me, Oscar comes up later and it made me feel incredibly awkward about precisely what Brian was comfortable doing to other people, but we'll take that as it comes. As well as actually locating a map of the mines so he doesn't get lost and starve to death down there. Now, finding the map is probably the most unnecessarily contrived thing I think I've ever actually come up with, because to do this, to actually get your hands on this map, you have to, one, find out that the bank has a vault underneath the building which may contain lots of valuable information and items. Two, figure out where the floor might be weak, because when you go over to the bank, there is a hole in the floor, but it's already stuffed up with dirt and mud and everything, so you can't really get in that way, which is, by itself, kind of a fucked up red herring, and I never understood precisely why the game even put that there. Then you've got to go over to Saturn's place, one of the artists, and I suppose I should mention here that Douglasville is kind of a cool location because it is basically an artist commune. You have Sushi, who are a hacker, who is rocking some absolutely heinous early noughties flared bottom cargo pants. You've got Saturn, another case of just glorious glute modelling on the behalf of Pendulo Studios. And god damn it, there is a third guy there. He's not there for like 90% of the fucking chapter, and he pops up right at the end, and I cannot remember his name. Cool Rastafarian guy who just bluntly goes no when asked to explain Rastafarian beliefs, which was, I think, the funniest part of that entire chapter. Just that blunt, can you tell me something about Rastafarianism? No. Alright. Oh, Rutger, that's his name, because I was thinking, Rutger Hauer? No, that's a completely different dude, but no. Although Rutger Hauer now playing just a Rastafarian guy, I'm not sure if that would be racist or really funny. Possibly both. Moving swiftly on before I really make myself out like an arsehole. You essentially have to go to Saturn's workshop, catapult a can of paint off of just a random catapult he's got in his place, because for some reason Saturn believes that ceilings are an oppressive form of architecture and you should not have them on your buildings, which I guess works when you're in the middle of the fucking desert, maybe not so much when you're in New England. Then contrive events to get him out of there by going and... oh fuck, okay. If it feels like this is very loose and not necessarily well coordinated, don't worry, the written script was just as bad as this. There is a whole secondary section where you have to help a guy called Joshua. Now, I mentioned previously that Runaway does tend to exaggerate physical forms, and it could be interpreted, depending on how you feel, that some of those forms are maybe a little exploitative or a little stereotypical in a way that people would find offensive. But I always found that up until this point, that was more a case of personal determination, and nothing really smacked of overt, like, homophobia or racism or anything like that. Joshua looks like an American World War II anti-Japanese propaganda poster. Buck teeth, Coke bottle glasses. It's so unnecessarily, overtly, racially caricaturish. It's genuinely confusing to me as to whether this was an intentional thing or whether or not it was purely accidental. It's like hearing a grandparent say something just casually racist. You just ask yourself, okay, did they actually mean that, or was that just like some xenophobic, like, knee-jerk reflex kicking off in the back end of their brain by default? The problem is that Joshua by himself is basically just a UFO nut, and his entire kind of puzzle quest line is helping him make contact with an alien, with a species of aliens he believes reside somewhere around this big crater. Which, I suppose this is the spoiler area. Yep, they totally fucking exist, and he does get beamed up into space at the end of it, which, I mean, sure, go off. I'm, at this point, pretty much up for anything. It's just that when Joshua first comes up, you are just not for a fucking loop as to, okay, where is this going? Are we about to get, incredibly offensive, ching-chong kind of stuff, or is this going to be just an accident of design? Someone somewhere in Pendulo Studios was like, I need to get some character references for a Japanese character. But all I've got is this World War II American propaganda textbook. Close enough. And just went with that, because no. I completely understand you want to go for kind of caricatures, but base those caricatures on, like, life choice and kind of more social identity, maybe? Don't make it about racial caricatures, because if that's the case, I mean, oh my god, Rutger would have been incredibly awkward. Like, he is definitely an exaggerated form, but he is not quite to the same level of racial caricature that Joshua is. But anyway, it doesn't necessarily derail the game, and by and large, the game itself never seems to stray completely into anywhere that would make people feel genuinely uncomfortable, but fair warning, it was a moment that would make me go, okay, and it would most likely make a few other people go, oof, as well. I hope this is something that the Runaway series does address in later games, where they go, oh, maybe we shouldn't have done that. But essentially, with that all done, with the safe found, since we actually get Saturn out of the workshop and then fire his fucking statue through the ceiling, which somehow has the same ballistic properties of a can of paint, to smash through the floor, to then actually reveal the safe, which we then have to go down, then go back up, talk to Sushi, figure out what the type of safe it is, then go back down again and brute force the fucking combination. So some of the puzzles here are difficult. The puzzle that you have to do for Joshua is a series of notes. You have to do 5 in a sequence with no repetition, and you've got 7 notes to choose from. I spent 40 fucking minutes doing it, and that is mostly due to the fact that I actually referred to the guide and put the wrong notes in, because I'm that fucking stupid. But at the very least, that was a puzzle that was an actual puzzle. It was something where you actually had an objective, you had a series of conditions, and you had an input, and you had to work it out from there. Almost every other puzzle in Douglasville is a time waster, and there is no great... Well, okay, there's 2. The bank save puzzle is possibly the most naked time waster, because you simply go down into the bank, go into the hole in the ground, go to the safe, and then just click about 65 fucking times. I didn't count it, but it felt like more, to turn the tumbler increment by increment, until you hear that click. Then you go back the other way, increment by increment, until you have done all 3 numbers. And I say this in other games as well, if you could do it in a cutscene, because there is no challenge and no risk of failure, do it in a fucking cutscene. Do not make me manually input a combination when I already fucking know it. It is so unnecessary. It's such naked padding of the game. But anyway, with that all done, we go through the mines, and sure enough, Gina's there for some... Oh no, she drags herself out of the... To be honest, Gina actually gets put through the fucking ringer in this section, because effectively what happens is she falls down a hole, blacks out, breaks her leg, comes to, nearly dies of dehydration, and drags herself through the mines to daylight. And it's just pure fucking luck that Brian gets there in time. So, at the same time, I'm like, Gina is built as a very disposable character, yet the game absolutely kicks the shit out of her on very regular occasions. So, I kind of feel bad for her. Or at least I did feel bad for her. Don't worry, I start to hate her again pretty shortly after this. This whole Hopi section is, at the same time, like, it's nice in terms of the way it looks, and there's a very nice level of care put into the way that the sets look, and the whole Hopi village has got this lovely kind of crumbling Mesopotamian kind of Aztec theme. Not Mesopotamian, that's fucking Iraq. What am I talking about? But, you know, that lovely Aztec theme to it with kind of the stepped buildings and all that kind of cool stuff. But it's a very, very brief scene, and you literally just go from A to B, stick the cross into a big stone idol's mouth, it opens up, you go into a crypt, and Wapuchim is there, the last, unfortunately, that we see of John St. John, who goes, "Here, you fucking idiot, the last guy who was here littered and left this," and just gives you a finger suspended in formaldehyde, because what we really need to do right now is trade one MacGuffin for another equally weird MacGuffin. This all pretty much kicks off the final arc of the game, which is essentially discovering that Gina has been completely bullshitting us this entire time. Under the pretense of doing a seance in order to talk to Gina's dead dad, in order to find out precisely what the fuck is going on with the finger, which by itself would be a bit of a, okay, sure, but whatever, but since we've already proven that aliens fucking exist, the seance actually doesn't really strike me as much of a psychological leap. We get Brian absolutely stoned out of his skull, go into a basement, tie him to a chair, and sadly no lap dance, although I was really hoping that Mama Dorito would just, I don't know where I was going with that sentence, but I'll leave your own mental image to percolate up there. Oh dear, God, that girl is fucking stacked, Jesus Christ. But anyway, this game made me too horny, 10 out of 10. We essentially discover that Gina is actually lied about everything, her father is fine, and the guy that she saw killed was a guy called Johnny the Indian, because, yeah, of course we've got to have some kind of tasteless throwaway representation of Native American people, for fuck's sake, who ripped off the mob for $20 million, which by itself is like, oh no, that's a fairly cool twist, only it's then revealed that Johnny got his sister, who was a nun, to open up an account in an incredibly secure bank so he could stash the money there, but then got so paranoid that he killed his sister, cut off her finger so he could then use it for the fucking biometric lock, and then threw her body into a fucking ditch. It takes such a ludicrous left-hand swerve into darkness. I just went, oh god, how bad is this final act going to be? Is this going to be like True Romance when we lose 90% of the cast in the final firefight or something? But thankfully, it doesn't get much worse than that. That is about as dark as the game is actually willing to get. From here on out, it's mostly a case of just trying to wrap up the plotline with the Mafia, who have actually now arrived on the outskirts of Douglasville and are basically ready to murder essentially everyone. And this has been the running thing, is these two hitmen have basically killed everyone that Brian and Gina have come into contact with, which kind of sucks in the museum, although it did kill the janitor, who was just a fucking misogynistic dickweed in the first place. But yeah, you feel like these guys probably could have made less of an issue for themselves if they just not killed every witness that they walked by, and maybe just only pulled out their guns and knives when they actually had to kill Brian and Gina. But fuck it, why not? None of this makes any sense in the first place. Stop looking for logic in a pulpy Spanish point-and-click adventure game. What the fuck am I doing? Essentially, we resolve this whole situation by Brian convincing Oscar, the big, beefy, boulder-hefting chap, to get a gun, get a sheriff's star, become the sheriff of Douglasville, and just go and tell two professional killers to stop being baddies. And I was fully expecting this to go horribly wrong and Oscar to just get fucking killed. But no, miraculously, and apparently because Oscar has actually got kind of a shady past and he's kind of turned over a new leaf, thanks to Mama Dorita, he actually does it. He beats those two fucking dudes up and just stuffs them in the prison cell. And one quick deep fake by Sushi later, we've basically set these two guys up to be killed by the mob because we've made them think that they've run off with the money and faked our deaths. Which, I mean, Brian has always been morally flexible whenever this game has kind of gone for slightly more dubious choices, but this is a bit fucking cold. But anyway, the game pretty much concludes with Brian and Gina finally getting to California, with Brian having basically done all of this so he could get to Berkeley and actually accept his position at the university. And for just one brief, shining moment, I was just hoping Brian would go, "Be gone, thought," and just go off and live the rest of his life. But no, you just ran off with the sexy stripper with the millions of dollars and not gotten into massive amounts of student debt and got a degree that's not going to be worth anything in a bloated job market. Although it was 2001, so it probably actually meant a lot more back then. But anyway, it's big, sexy, violent wish fulfillment, and the whole thing ends with, you know, Brian just relaxing in the sports car while Gina drives it along the Golden Gate Bridge for what feels like far too long. It was almost certainly supposed to be the credit sequence, but then they forgot to actually put the credits on that bit of video, so then it had to stick it immediately afterwards. And yeah, that was it. Runaway is a pretty straightforward game. It doesn't try to do anything tremendously over the top, and I've definitely glossed over a few of the weirder bits that didn't necessarily warrant mentioning because they were just generically weird. I'd much rather if you played the game you tried it yourself and went, "Oh, what the fuck is that?" But anyway, I would really recommend this game to anyone who's into point-and-click adventure games, and if you are new and you are looking to get into this kind of stuff, it's worth trying. I would definitely say there are some bits of content in here that may annoy. I don't like to use the term trigger a lot because that's normally reserved for much more traumatic stuff, and this is more just rather ham-fisted portrayals of racial demographics and other things like that. So definitely go into it with a certain couching in your mind of it's a game made in 2001 by a European developer. Expect this stuff not to necessarily be too progressive, but at the same time, it's enjoyable. I never really had a major issue with it when I wasn't using the guide. It's something that just is a relic of the time it was made. It could have maybe pushed the boat out a bit more in trying to streamline the experience for the player, but as it stands, it's perfectly fine. I'm glad that it's got Pendulo back out of a rut. I'm really interested to see where the other games go. And yeah, I would like to thank you for listening to me ramble for, holy shit, more than half an hour. This is 10 minutes longer than the written version of the script. I only hope it came out better. Anyway, thank you very much for listening to me ramble. I will catch you all later. I'm going to take a little break from point-and-click adventure games for a while, simply because my brain needs to reset. I cannot possibly process any more of these for a while, so lovely, horror games, stupid first-person shooters, that kind of shit, that's definitely where I'm going back to. But anyway, have a great day, look after yourselves, and I'll talk to you later.